The rain fell like needles against the canvas of Felix's merchant wagon, each drop drumming a rhythm that matched his weary heartbeat. The crossroads ahead disappeared into gray mist, 3 paths stretching into uncertainty while the storm claimed the dying light of evening. His horses snorted and stamped, eager for shelter. But Felix had learned patience in his years of traveling these remote trade routes. He was reaching for his oil lantern when he saw her dot a figure hunched beside the old stone marker, barely visible through the rain. At first he thought it might be a pile of discarded cloth, but then she moved, lifting her head toward the sound of his approaching wagon, even through the downpour. Felix could see how thin she was, how her dark hair stuck to her face like wet paint. "Easy there," Felix murmured to his horses, pulling the reins gently. The wagon creaked to a stop just a few feet from where she sat. He grabbed his heavy cloak and climbed down, his boots squelching in the mud. The young woman scrambled to her feet as he approached, and Felix's heart clenched at the sight of her. She couldn't have been more than 20, with hollow cheeks and clothes that had seen better months, if not years. Her feet were bare despite the cold, and when she looked up at him, her green eyes held a desperate wildness that reminded him of a cornered animal. "Please," she said, her voice barely audible over the rain. "I can warm your bed tonight. I can do whatever you need. Just give me water. Just let me stay dry." Felix stopped walking. The words hit him like a physical blow, not because of what she offered, but because of the resignation in her voice. This wasn't the first time she'd made such an offer. Maybe not even the 10th. "No," he said simply. She blinked, rain streaming down her face. "No, you don't need to do that." Felix took a step closer, keeping his hands visible and his voice gentle. "When did you last eat?" The question seemed to confuse her more than his refusal. She stared at him for a long moment, swaying slightly on her feet. 3 days, maybe 4. Felix nodded and turned back toward his wagon. "Come on." Then, "Wait," her voice cracked. I want you out of this rain before you catch your death," Felix called over his shoulder. "Everything else can wait." He heard her footsteps behind him, hesitant and uncertain. By the time he'd climbed back onto the wagon seat, she was standing beside it, water dripping from her hair onto the muddy ground. "What's your name?" Felix asked, offering her his hand. "Nora," she whispered. "Well, Nora, I'm Felix. Climb up and let's find somewhere dry." She took his hand with trembling fingers, and Felix was shocked by how cold her skin was. He helped pull her up onto the seat beside him, then immediately shrugged out of his cloak and wrapped it around her shoulders. "But you'll be cold," she protested weakly. "I've got more layers than you do," Felix said, snapping the reins. The horses moved forward eagerly, knowing they were heading for shelter. "There's an old way station about a mile down the left path. Roof might leak, but it's better than sitting in the open." They rode in silence for several minutes, the only sounds the steady patter of rain and the creaking of wagon wheels. Felix could feel Nora watching him, as if trying to solve a puzzle she'd never encountered before. "Why?" she finally asked. "Why?" Why help me? You don't know me. I could be a thief, a murderer." Felix considered this seriously. "Could be. But you offered yourself for water, not tried to rob me. And murderers don't usually look half-starved." He glanced at her. "Besides, decent folk help each other when they can. That's just how the world should work." Nora pulled his cloak tighter around herself. "That's not how it's ever worked for me." "Well," Felix said quietly, "maybe it's time for that to change." The way station appeared through the mist exactly where Felix remembered it. A small stone building with a thatched roof that had definitely seen better days. But the walls were solid, and there was a lean-to shelter for the horses. Felix pulled the wagon under the overhang and began unhitching his team, while Nora sat motionless on the seat. "You can get down," he told her gently. "Door's probably stuck, but there should be a fire pit inside." Nora climbed down slowly, still wearing his cloak like armor. She pushed at the wooden door, which groaned open with considerable effort. Felix finished with the horses and grabbed his pack from the wagon, then followed her inside. The way station was exactly what he'd expected. One room with a stone fire pit, a few rough wooden benches, and years of accumulated dirt and debris. But it was dry, and that was enough. Sit down, Felix said, pointing to a bench near the fire pit. I'll get a fire going. He had kindling and dry wood in his pack, along with food, water, and a few basic supplies. Within minutes, flames were crackling in the pit, casting dancing shadows on the walls. The warmth seemed to revive Nora somewhat, though she still watched Felix's every movement with wary eyes. Here, Felix handed her a water skin and a chunk of hard bread. Start with these, slowly. Nora took the water skin with shaking hands and drank deeply, then tore into the bread like she was afraid it might disappear. Felix watched her eat and felt something twist in his chest. How long had she been surviving like this? How many people had passed her by, or worse, taken advantage of her desperation? There's more, he said when she finished the bread. Stew in the pot, dried fruit, cheese. But give your stomach time to adjust first. Nora nodded, still not quite believing this was real. What do you want from me? Nothing you're not willing to give freely, Felix said firmly. You're safe here, Nora. For tonight, at least, you're safe. She stared at him across the fire, and for the first time since he'd found her, some of the wildness left her eyes. Not all of it, but enough that she looked more human and less like a frightened animal. I don't understand you, she whispered. Felix settled back against the wall, watching the flames dance. Maybe that's okay for now. Understanding can come later, when you've had food and rest and time to think clearly. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside the little way station, something fragile and new was beginning to take root. Neither of them knew it yet, but this moment by the fire would become the foundation of everything that followed. Felix had offered water to a stranger and in return received something far more precious than he could have imagined. Nora fell asleep that night wrapped in his cloak, her head pillowed on her arm. Finally warm and dry, Felix kept the fire burning and watched over her until dawn, already knowing that whatever happened next, he couldn't simply leave her at the crossroads again. Some encounters change everything, and Felix was wise enough to recognize one when it found him. Morning came with pale sunlight filtering through the way station's single window, and Nora woke to the smell of something wonderful cooking over the fire. She sat up slowly, Felix's cloak still wrapped around her shoulders, and found him stirring a small pot with practiced ease. Good morning, Felix said without turning around. How do you feel? Nora tested her voice, surprised to find it stronger than the night before. Better, thank you. Hungry, she nodded, though the word felt inadequate. She was always hungry. Had been for so long that the gnawing emptiness had become part of her, like a second heartbeat. But this was different somehow, softer round the edges. Felix ladled thick porridge into a wooden bowl and handed it to her along with a spoon. Real food, served on real dishes, like she was a person who mattered. Nora ate slowly this time, savoring each bite while Felix packed his supplies back into neat bundles. Where are you headed? She asked between spoonfuls. Millbrook Village, about half a day's ride from here. It's market day tomorrow, and I've got cloth and spices to trade. Felix glanced at her. What about you? Where were you going when the storm caught you? Nora stirred her porridge, watching the wooden spoon make circles in the thick grain. Anywhere. That wasn't where I came from. Felix waited, and when she didn't elaborate, he simply nodded. Well, Millbrook's as good a direction as any. You're welcome to ride along if you want. Why would you do that? Because the roads can be dangerous for someone traveling alone. Felix shouldered his pack, and because I could use the company. The honesty in his voice made something flutter in Nora's chest, unfamiliar and frightening. She finished her porridge and handed him the bowl. I don't have anything to pay you with. I'm not asking for payment. Everyone asks for payment, one way or another. Felix looked at her steadily. Then you've been dealing with the wrong people. They loaded the wagon in comfortable silence, Nora helping to arrange the carefully wrapped bundles of goods. Felix's trade stock was modest but well organized. Bolts of sturdy cloth, small sacks of precious spices, simple tools, and trinkets that would appeal to village folk. Everything was clean, fairly obtained, honestly labeled. You're not very rich, are you? Nora observed as they climbed onto the wagon seat. Felix laughed, a sound that seemed to lighten the morning air. Rich enough, I eat well, sleep dry most nights, and answer to no one but myself. That's wealth of a sort. As they traveled, Nora found herself studying Felix when she thought he wasn't looking. He was perhaps 30, with sun-weathered hands, and laugh lines around his brown eyes that spoke of someone who'd found reasons to smile despite life's hardships. His dark hair was starting to show threads of silver at the temples, and when he concentrated on navigating a difficult stretch of road, he had a habit of humming quietly under his breath. "Where did you learn to trade?" she asked as they paused to water the horses at a stream. "My father was a merchant before me, traveled these same routes until his legs gave out. Felix led the horses to drink. He taught me that reputation is worth more than gold, and that fair dealing comes back to you threefold. And you believe that? I've lived it for 12 years now. It's served me well enough." Nora watched him tend to his animals with gentle efficiency. Everything Felix did seemed measured, thoughtful, kind. It was bewildering. "Where I come from. Kindness is a luxury only fools can afford." Felix straightened, giving her his full attention. "Where do you come from, Nora?" She was quiet for so long that he'd started to turn away when she finally spoke. "I was indentured when I was 14. My parents owed debts they couldn't pay, so they signed me over to a landowner named Marcus. 7 years of service," he said. 7 years and the debt would be cleared. Felix's hands stilled on the horse's harness, and 7 years became 8, then 9. There was always some new expense, some reason the debt had grown instead of shrunk. Food, lodging, clothing, medicine when I got sick from overwork. The numbers never seemed to go down. Nora's voice was steady, but Felix could hear the old pain underneath. "I realize he never intended to let me go. So you ran 3 weeks ago, left everything behind and just ran?" She looked down at her hands. "I don't even know if what I did was legal. Maybe I'm still his property. Maybe he's looking for me." Felix finished with the horses and came to sit beside her on a fallen log. "You're not property, Nora. People aren't property, no matter what papers say otherwise. Easy to say when you've always been free. Freedom isn't something you're given," Felix said quietly. "It's something you choose every day. You chose it when you ran. You're choosing it now." They reached Millbrook as the sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon. The village was larger than Nora had expected, with a proper market square and houses that showed signs of prosperity. People moved about their evening business with the unhurried confidence of those who'd never known real want. Felix guided the wagon to the village inn, where a plump woman named Elena greeted him warmly. "Felix, good to see you back. Your usual room. Actually, I'll need 2 rooms tonight, Elena. This is Nora. She's traveling with me." Elena's eyebrows rose slightly as she took in Nora's appearance, but her smile remained polite. "Of course, though. I'm afraid the second room will be our smallest. It's all we have available." "That's fine," Nora said quickly. "I'm grateful for anything." As Felix paid for the rooms and arranged to stable his horses, Nora caught the way Elena's eyes followed her, calculating and slightly suspicious. She was used to such looks, but somehow they stung more now, after a day of being treated like she mattered. "Don't mind Elena," Felix said as they carried their belongings upstairs. "She's protective of the merchants who visit regularly. She'll warm up once she gets to know you." "Will she get the chance?" Felix paused outside her door, key in hand. "That depends." "Are you planning to disappear in the night?" Nora met his eyes, surprised by the vulnerability she saw there. He was trying to hide it, but the question mattered to him more than it should. "Perhaps no," she said softly. "I'm not planning to disappear." "Good." Felix handed her the key. "Market starts early tomorrow, if you want to help. I could use an extra pair of hands setting up the stall. I don't know anything about trading. I could teach you. Fair wages for fair work." Nora stared at him. "You'd pay me?" "Of course I'd pay you. Why wouldn't I?" "Because no one ever had before. Because she'd worked for years without seeing a single coin that belonged to her. Because the idea of earning something honestly felt as foreign as flying." "I'd like that," she said instead. Felix smiled, and Nora felt that fluttering sensation in her chest again, stronger this time. Dangerous, because it felt like hope, and hope had Always been a luxury she couldn't afford. But maybe, just maybe, that was changing too. The market day dawned crisp and clear, with the kind of golden light that made even humble goods look precious. Nora stood beside Felix's stall, arranging bolts of cloth with hands that had learned to be steady despite the flutter of nerves in her stomach. 3 days had passed since their arrival in Millbrook, and she was beginning to understand the rhythm of honest trade. "Remember," Felix said quietly as the first customers approached, "let them touch the fabric. Quality speaks for itself, but people need to feel it to believe it." Nora nodded, watching as a young mother examined a length of blue wool, her fingers testing the weave while her toddler tugged at her skirts. The woman's face lit up when she felt the softness, and Nora found herself smiling as Felix quoted a fair price that made both buyer and seller satisfied. "You're getting good at this," Felix murmured as the woman walked away with her purchase wrapped in brown paper. "You're a good teacher," Nora replied, surprised by how natural the words felt. Compliments had been foreign to her once, given and received with suspicion. But with Felix, honesty came easier each day. They worked side by side through the morning, and Nora marveled at how Felix treated each customer with the same respect, whether they bought expensive silk or simple cotton thread. He remembered names, asked about families, offered genuine advice about which goods would serve their needs best. This was more than commerce. She realized it was community. "Nora," Elena's voice came from behind them, tight with something that might have been warning. "There's a man asking for you at the inn. Says he's your master." The bolt of green fabric slipped from Nora's hands, unrolling across the cobblestones. Her face went white as fresh snow, and Felix saw her hands begin to shake. "What does he look like?" Felix asked Elena, his voice carefully controlled. "Tall man, expensive clothes, riding a fine horse, has papers with him." Elena's expression was troubled. "He seems official." Nora was already backing away from the stall, her eyes wide with the same wild fear Felix had seen that first night at the crossroads. "I have to run. I have to go. Now, wait." Felix caught her arm gently. "You don't have to run anymore. You don't understand. If Marcus finds me, he'll drag me back. He has legal documents, witnesses, money for bribes if needed." Nora's voice was rising, drawing curious glances from other merchants. "I can't fight him. I have nothing. You have me." The words hung in the air between them, simple and profound. Nora stared at Felix, and something shifted in her expression, hope warring with disbelief. "Felix, you can't. He'll ruin you if you interfere. He has connections, influence. I don't care." Felix was already untying his leather apron. "Elena, can you watch the stall? We'll be back shortly." The walk to the inn felt endless and far too short all at once. Nora's hand found Felix's without conscious thought, and he squeezed her fingers reassuringly. Whatever happened, she wouldn't face it alone. Marcus stood in the inn's common room like he owned it, his fine clothes and commanding presence making the other patrons seem suddenly shabby by comparison. He was younger than Nora had made him sound, perhaps 40, with the kind of cold handsomeness that spoke of privilege and power. When he saw Nora, his smile was sharp as winter. "There you are, my dear. You've led me quite a chase." Marcus's voice was cultured, reasonable, the tone of a man explaining something obvious to a slow child. "Come along now. We have a long ride ahead of us." "No." Nora's voice was barely a whisper, but it carried clearly in the sudden silence of the common room. Marcus's eyebrows rose. "No, I'm afraid that's not your choice to make. You're under contract until your debt is paid, and I have the papers to prove it." He produced a leather portfolio from his coat. 700 silver pieces, plus interest and expenses for this little adventure of yours. Felix stepped forward. "How much, I beg your pardon?" "The debt. How much to clear it completely?" Marcus looked Felix up and down, taking in his simple merchant's clothes and calloused hands. His smile grew more amused. 1,000 silver pieces. Though I doubt a humble trader could raise such a sum. You'd be surprised." Felix's voice was steady, but Nora could see the tension in his shoulders. That was more money than most people saw in years, more than she'd thought her freedom could possibly be worth. "Felix, no," she whispered. "That's everything you have. Maybe more. Not everything. Felix said quietly. Not the things that matter. He turned to Marcus. I'll need 3 days to liquidate my stock and arrange the funds. Will you accept my word as bond until then? Marcus studied Felix's face, looking for deception and finding only determination. Your word and something more tangible. The girl stays with me until payment is made. Absolutely not. Felix's voice turned hard as iron. She stays free, or there's no deal. Then we have a problem, because I won't risk her running again. She won't run. Felix looked at Nora, and she saw something in his eyes that made her heart stop and start again. Will you, Nora? It wasn't really a question. It was a promise, wrapped in trust she'd never thought to receive. He was offering to pay a fortune for her freedom, asking only that she trust him enough to stay. I won't run, she whispered. Marcus looked between them, clearly sensing undercurrents he didn't understand. Finally, he shrugged. 3 days, then. But if you default, merchant, I'll take compensation in other ways. The threat was clear enough. Felix nodded curtly, understood. After Marcus left to find lodging, Nora and Felix walked in silence back toward the market. The afternoon sun felt different now, weighted with possibility and fear in equal measure. You can't do this, Nora said when they reached a quiet spot behind the stalls. 1,000 silver pieces, Felix. That's your entire future? No, Felix said, turning to face her fully. You're my future. Don't you see that yet? The words hit her like a physical blow. She'd known their partnership had deepened into something more, but hearing it spoken aloud made it real in a way that terrified and thrilled her. I'm nobody, she whispered. A runaway servant with nothing to offer. You're wrong. Felix stepped closer, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his brown eyes. You're brave enough to choose freedom over safety. You're kind enough to help strangers in the market. You're strong enough to rebuild yourself from nothing. His voice dropped. And you're precious enough that I'd pay any price to keep you safe. Nora felt tears she'd been holding back for weeks finally spill over. What if I'm not worth it? What if you lose everything and regret it? Felix reached up to cup her face in his hands, thumbs gently wiping away her tears. Then I'll have loved someone worth loving, and that's never a loss. The word hung between them like a bridge neither had expected to cross so soon. Loved. Not would love, not could love, but loved, present tense. Real and immediate and transforming everything. Felix, she breathed, and then somehow they were kissing, gentle and desperate and full of all the words they hadn't found yet. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. We should leave, Nora said quietly. After you pay him, we should go far away from here. Start fresh somewhere he can't find us. Felix smiled, and it was like sunrise. I was hoping you'd say that. That night, they sat together outside the inn, watching stars wheel overhead and planning a future that had seemed impossible just days before. Nora's hand rested in Felix's, and for the first time in her life, she understood what home could feel like. Not a place, but a person who chose to love you when they didn't have to. The farmhouse appeared through the autumn mist like something from a half-remembered dream, its stone walls golden in the late afternoon light, and smoke curling from the chimney in lazy spirals. Nora felt Felix relax beside her on the wagon seat, his shoulders dropping as familiar sights welcomed him home. There, he said softly, pointing to a figure working in the garden. That's Anna. Nora watched as a woman straightened from among the winter vegetables, shading her eyes against the sun. Even from a distance, the family resemblance was clear in the way she moved, the tilt of her head as she recognized the approaching wagon. Felix. Anna's voice carried across the yard, bright with joy and surprise. She was running now, skirts lifted to keep from tripping, and Nora felt a pang of something that might have been envy. When had anyone ever run toward her with such pure happiness? Felix jumped down from the wagon and caught his sister in a fierce hug, spinning her round once before setting her feet back on the ground. Hello, little sister. Little sister nothing. You've been gone 8 months, Anna scolded, though her smile never wavered. William was starting to think you'd been eaten by wolves. Her eyes found Nora then, curious but kind. And who is this? Anna, this is Nora. Felix helped Nora down from the wagon, his hand warm and steady on her arm. Nora, my sister Anna. and the finest baker in 3 counties. For counties, Anna corrected with mock severity, then stepped forward to take Nora's hands in both of hers. Welcome to our home, Nora. Any friend of Felix's is family here. The casual warmth of the greeting nearly undid Nora completely. Anna's hands were soft from kneading bread, her smile genuine. And when she said family, there was no calculation behind it, no price expected in return. Thank you, Nora managed. I hope we're not imposing. Imposing, Anna laughed. Felix, where did you find this polite creature? She's nothing like the usual rogues you travel with. A man emerged from the barn then, tall and broad-shouldered with the kind of steady presence that came from working the land. His face was weathered, but gentle, and when he smiled at Felix, Nora saw the deep affection between the 2 men. William, Felix called out. Meet Nora. William wiped his hands on his leather apron before offering one to Nora. Pleasure to meet you. Miss Felix has good taste in traveling companions. She's more than a traveling companion, Felix said, quietly, and Nora felt heat rise in her cheeks as Anna's eyebrows shot up with interest. Is she now? Anna's voice was carefully neutral, but her eyes danced with curiosity. Well, that's a conversation for after supper, I think. William helped Felix with the wagon. Nora and I have things to discuss. Before Nora could protest, Anna was leading her toward the house, chattering about the weather and the harvest, and how Felix never wrote letters like he promised. The kitchen was everything Nora had never known she dreamed of. Warm stone floors, herbs hanging from the rafters, the smell of fresh bread and simmering stew filling every corner. Sit, Anna commanded, pushing Nora into a chair by the fire. You look half frozen. Felix always did have terrible timing with his arrivals. We didn't mean to arrive so late in the season, Nora said. There were complications. Anna handed her a mug of hot cider, studying her face. Complications that put those shadows under your eyes. Nora's hand went unconsciously to her cheek. Even weeks of good food and rest hadn't entirely erased the marks of her old life. Something like that. Well, whatever they were, they're behind you now. Anna settled into the chair across from her. Felix doesn't bring people home lightly. In fact, you're the first woman he's ever brought here. We're not, that is, we haven't. Nora stumbled over the words, unsure how to explain what they were to each other. You love him, Anna said simply, and unless I'm very much mistaken, he loves you too. Nora stared into her cider, feeling exposed. Is it that obvious? To someone who knows Felix, yes. He looks at you like you hung the stars. Anna leaned forward. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Over the following weeks, Nora tried to find her place in the rhythm of farm life. Anna taught her to bake bread and preserve vegetables for winter. William showed her how to tend the animals and repair tools. Felix worked alongside them all. And in the evenings they sat by the fire sharing stories and laughter. It should have been perfect. It was perfect, which was exactly the problem. I don't belong here, Nora told Felix one night as they walked through the orchard behind the house. The apple trees were bare now, their branches reaching toward stars that seemed close enough to touch. Why would you say that? Because it's true. Nora stopped walking, wrapping her arms around herself against the cold. Look at this place, Felix. Look at your family. They're good people who've built something beautiful together. And I'm your what? Damaged goods, a runaway with nothing to offer. Felix turned to face her fully, his expression serious in the moonlight. Do you know what Anna told me yesterday? Nora shook her head. She said that in 3 weeks, you've brought more laughter into this house than we've had in years. That William hums while he works now, because you taught him that old song from your childhood. That the bread tastes better when you help make it because you put care into every loaf. Felix, she said, he continued, stepping closer, that watching you discover joy in simple things has reminded her why she fell in love with this life. In the first place, tears stung Nora's eyes. She said that. She did. And she's right. Felix reached for her hands. You belong here, Nora, not because you're perfect, but because you're you. Because you make everything better just by being part of it. Before Nora could respond, William's voice rang out across the yard, sharp with alarm. Felix, Anna, come quickly. They ran toward the house, fear clutching at Nora's throat. They found William in the barn, lantern held high, staring at the grain stores with a grim expression. "Rats," he said simply. "They've gotten into the winter. Wheat? Half the stores are ruined." Anna pressed her hand to her mouth. "Half? William, that's not enough to last until spring." "I know." William's voice was heavy. "We'll have to buy grain at market prices, if we can find any to buy." Felix studied the damaged stores, his merchant's mind already calculating costs. "How much do we need?" 20 bushels minimum. "But with the poor harvest this year, prices will be—" William shook his head. "More than we have." Nora watched the family she'd come to love face potential disaster, and something crystallized inside her. These people had welcomed her without question, treated her like she belonged, shown her what a real home could be. Now it was her turn to give something back. "I have money," she said quietly. They all turned to stare at her. "Not much," she continued, "but Felix paid me fair wages for the market work, and I've been saving every copper." She looked directly at Anna. "Let me help Nora." "No." Felix said immediately. "That money is yours. Your freedom, your future." "My future is here," she said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "If you'll have me." Felix was quiet for a long moment, studying her face in the lantern light. Then he smiled, slow and wondering. "Are you sure? Winter on a farm isn't easy. Spring planting is harder, and I can't promise riches or adventure." "I don't want riches or adventure." Nora stepped closer to him. "I want to wake up every morning knowing I'm home. I want to bake bread with Anna and learn farming from William. I want to sit by the fire with you every evening and plan tomorrow. And if I asked you to marry me?" Felix's voice was soft, but it carried clearly in the still night air. "Would you want that too?" Nora's heart stopped, then started again, faster than before. "Are you asking?" "I'm asking." She looked around at the barn, the damaged grain, the family watching them with love and hope in their faces. This wasn't how she'd imagined such a moment, if she'd ever dared to imagine it at all. But somehow it was perfect anyway, real and practical and surrounded by the life they were choosing to build together. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I want that too." Felix kissed her then, gentle and sure, while Anna cheered and William chuckled, and the damaged grain was temporarily forgotten, because some things mattered more than perfect timing or ideal circumstances. Sometimes love was enough, and home was wherever you chose to plant it. Spring arrived with the scent of apple blossoms and the sound of Nora's laughter. Echoing through the farmhouse kitchen, she stood at the window, watching Felix and William repair the winter damage to the barn roof, her hands dusted with flour from the morning's bread making. "You're glowing," Anna observed from her seat at the kitchen table, where she was carefully stitching tiny pearls onto a length of cream-colored silk. Nora touched her cheek self-consciously. "Am I?" "Like starlight." Anna held up the dress she'd been working on for weeks. "Though I suppose that's what happens when a woman finds her place in the world." The wedding dress was simple but beautiful, cut from fabric Felix had traded for in a distant market town. Anna had spent countless evening hours embroidering delicate flowers along the neckline and sleeves, each stitch placed with love and care. "I still can't believe this is real," Nora whispered, touching the silk with reverent fingers. 6 months ago, I was. 6 months ago doesn't matter," Anna said firmly. "What matters is today, and tomorrow, and all the days after that." Nora nodded, but her mind drifted anyway to that night at the crossroads, when she'd offered herself for water and shelter. The memory felt distant now, like something that had happened to another person entirely. That desperate girl who'd thought her body was the only thing of value she possessed seemed like a stranger. "Anna," she said quietly, "do you think Father Bernard will truly marry us, a runaway servant and a traveling merchant with no proper family name?" Anna set down her needle and came to wrap her arms around Nora from behind. "Father Bernard has known Felix since he was a boy getting into trouble with the church chickens, and he's seen how you've changed our brother's life. Trust me, he'll be honored to perform the ceremony." That afternoon, Nora walked alone to the village church, a simple stone building that had stood for longer than anyone could remember. Father Bernard was tending his small garden behind the building, his weathered hands gentle with the young plants. "Ah, Nora," he said, straightening with a slight wince. Come to discuss the final arrangements. Actually, I wanted to ask you something. Nora twisted her hands nervously. Do you think I'm worthy of this, of Felix, of the life we're planning? Father Bernard studied her with kind eyes that had seen decades of human joy and sorrow. Worthy? Child, none of us are worthy of the grace we receive. That's what makes it grace. But my past, your past brought you to this moment. Would you change it, knowing that any different choice might have led you away from Felix? Nora considered this. The hunger, the fear, the desperate years of servitude had been terrible, but they had also shaped her into someone who recognized kindness when it was offered, who understood the true value of safety and love and home. No, she said finally, I wouldn't change it. Then your past is not a burden, but a gift. It taught you to treasure what others might take for granted. The wedding day dawned clear and bright, with the kind of golden sunlight that seemed to bless everything it touched. Nora woke early in Anna's old bedroom, her stomach fluttering with nervous excitement. Anna helped her dress, braiding flowers from the garden into her dark hair and fastening the pearl buttons that ran down the back of the dress. When Nora finally looked at herself in the small mirror, she hardly recognized the woman staring back. You're beautiful, Anna whispered, tears bright in her eyes. I look different than I used to. You look loved, Anna corrected, and that changes everything. The ceremony was held in the village square, surrounded by neighbors who had come to know and care for the merchant and his bride over the long winter months. Elena from the inn had provided the wedding feast, declaring that any woman who could make Felix stop his wandering deserved the finest celebration they could manage. Father Bernard stood before them with his prayer book, but when he spoke, his words were simple and from the heart. Marriage, he said, is the choice to see another person truly, to love them not despite their flaws, but because of their wholeness. Felix, Nora, you have already made this choice. Today, you simply speak it aloud for all to witness. When Felix took her hands, Nora felt the same flutter of wonder she'd experienced that first night in the way station. Here was the man who had refused her desperate offer, who had given freely without expectation, who had paid a fortune for her freedom and asked nothing in return but her heart. I was lost when I found you, Felix said quietly, his voice carrying clearly in the still air. Wandering roads that led nowhere, trading in goods that meant nothing. You gave me a destination worth reaching. Nora's voice shook slightly as she replied, I offered you my body for water, but you gave me something I didn't even know existed. You gave me a soul worth keeping. When Father Bernard pronounced them husband and wife, Felix kissed her with the same gentle reverence he'd shown that very first night, and Nora tasted salt tears on both their lips. That the celebration lasted until the stars came out, filled with music and dancing and stories shared around the fire. But Nora's favorite moment came near midnight, when she and Felix slipped away from the crowd to walk in the garden behind the farmhouse. Do you remember, Felix said, stopping beside the apple trees where he'd proposed, what you asked for that first night? Water, Nora said, and shelter from the storm. And what did you get instead? Nora looked up at the stars, then at the house where Anna and William were cleaning up from the feast, then finally at Felix, whose face was soft with love and moonlight. Everything, she whispered. I got everything. He kissed her again then, slow and sweet and full of promises, while the spring wind carried the scent of apple blossoms and new beginnings. Somewhere in the distance, a night bird called, its song carrying across the fields where they would plant their future. Together, Nora had asked for water, but Felix had given her an ocean. She had asked for shelter, but he had given her a home. Most precious of all, she had offered her body as payment, but he had claimed her heart as a gift freely given. And in the morning, they would wake up together in the house they had chosen to fill with love, ready to begin the greatest adventure of all, a lifetime of ordinary days made extraordinary by the simple miracle of being chosen and choosing in return.